course, they don't have that support because they know that's politically it's very difficult to be a champion of immigration. I think if you're a strictly empirical person, nothing else, that should be an issue that you champion very strongly. And finally, I think you need to figure out what you're good at and find a way to figure out a way to help it serve those less fortunate than you. And then the classes that I spoke at today, I can see examples of how I've tried to do that in my own life, and I would encourage you to try and do that. Where everyone in this room is largely a person of privilege. It's a great ethical challenge, it's a great political challenge, moral challenge to figure out how actually as an external agent, even if you're from trying to help the country that you're from, any type of action by external agents on internal agents, on people who are being acted upon, is an issue that is very vexed and very problematic. But at the end of the day, the core principle that should inform it is trying to figure out what you're good at, which may take you until you're 30 to really figure that out. So it's a lifelong quest to really figure out what you're really good at. But keep persisting with that. Keep finding ways in which you can serve it, put it to the service of those less fortunate yourself, and not just your own bank account, as much as that's important in paying off student debts and everything else. All right, on that note, I'll leave it. Thanks very much. We'll take 3 together, just so we can. I'll try and I'm not giving the 3 answers, but I'll try 1, 2, and 3.
I was wondering, you talked about the 21 CD. You talked about the 21st century strategies.
Yep.
I was just wondering how difficult it would be to implement those strategies in countries that do not have a democratic political system, because they are inherently, they talk about, like, as you mentioned, accountability and taking the decision-making process to the people, and I would think that there would be indirect conflict with the political systems, values and ideologies. So maybe it's on. I was wondering how that would work.
Yeah, good question. Okay, great. Sorry.
Earlier you talked about microfinance as one of those big simple solutions to happen.
You were talking about the transaction-intensive process of solving problems. How do you change things on a local level using that process when the governments, for example, are almost parasitic? When looking at like the HIV problem in South Africa and how the former Minister of Health said things like garlic would help cure HIV/AIDS. How are you supposed to educate people when the government is telling false things?
Right. I'll answer those questions together because they're kind of variations on the same thing. At least the way you've articulated the problem there sort of demonstrates the problem that I'm really trying to get at, which is when there are these problems for which, for whatever reason, whether in terms of local cosmologies or because of the weird thinking of governments who are trying to explain problems to people in non-scientific ways, the response to those kinds of responses have consequences in the lives of people because they are reacting, or they're working in response to the prevailing sets of cosmologies that people have for thinking about those kinds of issues. So the response to it, if you're an activist or if you're someone trying to counter that kind of pressure, is itself a transaction-intensive process, right? It's a process of trying to lay out not just an alternative curriculum in some sense, or an alternative way of articulating what the problem actually is in a scientific, at least a lay scientific kind of way, but something that requires really long, patient engagement with that problem in order to be able to change that. Because people's mindsets don't just change because, new ideas have come along. You've got to change up the whole operating system in people's brains almost to be able to get a receptivity to that kind of message. I had a master's student at the Kennedy School who looked at attitudes to AIDS amongst AIDS workers in Kenya, right? And it was, these were the people that you would deem the AIDS professionals, whose job it was to be able to go out in the villages and explain to people how the disease is, what the disease is, how it's caught, and what to do about it, etc. And the knowledge amongst people who were the AIDS workers themselves, right, who would who wouldn't touch any of their other colleagues who adds aid because they thought they would actually acquire it through just touching them, right? Very basic sort of falsehoods about AIDS that were present even among the people whose job it was to be able to solve, respond to these particular problems was really high. So whether the problem itself has this transaction-intensive component structurally, and or whether you're either responding to that problem or trying to provide an alternative strategy for responding to that problem, the transaction-intensive component is just there, right? So the simple point of what I'm trying to say is, recognizing that is the first part towards being able to try and construct an alternative strategy for that, because the imperatives of the way that Jeff Sachs and other people respond to these issues is so much driven by getting the costs down and by getting the technology right. And that's not to say there aren't technological and cost issues to worry about. Of course there are, right? But all these kind of issues that you've just articulated are exactly the ones that require much more, inherently require, and can't be addressed any other way than by giving a much more people-oriented, transaction-intensive component incorporated into the strategy that you do with that. And I think that's true even in non-democratic environments. If you're looking at the kind of stuff we're talking about there in Cambodia, if you look at any sort of longer period of historical social change, most historical change has come about initially in circumstances that look really bleak, that look really unlikely in which these kind of things would happen. And that's the job of political activism, is to persist with things in circumstances that appear very unpromising, dealing with all the consequences, often risking lives in some cases, in order to be able to start changing them. That's how social change happens. It doesn't happen because evidence produced by scholars makes it happen. It happens because people risk their lives to make it happen, right? And dare I say it, if a certain candidate wins the election on November 5, that will be the result of hundreds of years of campaigning, and the people that are currently part of that campaign are standing on the shoulders of the giants that went before them in obscurity for centuries before that made it possible for us to even be in a situation where we could conceive of that, right? So even in the US, in 1850, it would have been inconceivable, even in 1950 probably, for people that are older than me, would have told me this, it was utterly inconceivable that a black man could be considered a candidate within a few weeks potentially of being president of the United States. So that has all come about in a highly, highly unlikely circumstance. And the task of political engagement, I think, is being willing to be committed to things in spite of a lot of the evidence that goes against that. What should add as a bottom point here, actually, one thing that you should do as a young person is get involved in something big that works early in your life. Right? If you get into something that's big that works early in your life, you'll deal with decades of frustration later thereafter. Right? So I've talked about some of this with you before. If you happen, and this is time for a political speech on my part, I'm American, so I can't endorse any candidate, whatever. If you happen to be part of the Obama campaign and he wins, all right, I guarantee you probably deal with 40 years of subsequent disappointment, all right, because you've had this initial success, all right? All right? It's transformational. It is. It's transformational in terms of what it means for you to be part of something that works, all right? Being part of something that works in your early 20s will empower you for the rest of your life, all right? And so it's really important that you not be cynical and burnt out, not just because that's what old people always tell you, but psychologically and pragmatically, all right? Unless you have some cognitive sense of what it means to be part of something big that works, all right? You'll always just be feeling cynical and frustrated. And by 40, in this business at least, you'll be so burned out by all of the usual tales of cynicism and corruption and frustration that you just won't make it, all right? So being involved in something, as I know some of you already are, in something like an Obama campaign, right, is powerful because it happens to produce an outcome that probably you're going to like, right? It's the genius of the strategy, if this works, is that it's all being done through young people that will be probably fired up for at least the rest of their lives on that kind of experience, in ways that it wouldn't happen if it was being done by 40-year-olds. And so, question on microfinance. The World Bank houses something called the Consultative Group to Assist the Poorest, CGAP, to throw an acronym at you. It's in principle it's the clearinghouse for all the repository of research and advocacy that's being done on microfinance issues. Microfinance as an issue as itself probably had its heyday in the late 1990s. I think there was, Microfinance Summits and Sam Walton and all these other Sam Harris, sorry.